My father ruined my dreams to protect the golden child and refused to pay for my education. But later, I got my sweet revenge. I am a 32-year-old guy. My younger brother is 28, and we grew up with our father, who is now 56. From the very beginning of middle school, my father always favored my brother, and over time, I got used to it. I was never the son my father wanted because, unlike him, I wasn't interested in sports or typical masculine activities. I was always more interested in things that are usually considered feminine. In essence, as a child, I was a mama's boy. I loved everything related to the kitchen, reading books, and even singing. My father tried to make me play football with him, but I wasn't good at it, and gradually, we grew apart. My brother, on the other hand, was exactly the son my father wanted. He was strong and fearless, not afraid to get dirty or even get injured. He was the ideal son for my father, and it was obvious that Dad loved my brother much more than me. He always spoke about him with admiration, and I never heard such praise directed at me. My mother, however, treated us equally and was fair to both of us. And that's why I loved her more. I really tried to build a relationship with my father and spend time with him, but after we grew apart, he showed no desire to restore our relationship. Unfortunately, the glue that held our crumbling family together was cancer, and by the time we discovered it, it was too late to do anything. She passed away before we could even grasp it. My mother's death literally destroyed me. At that time, I was a bit lost. The only solace for me was the kitchen, and I cooked something new every day as if my life depended on it. My mom was an excellent cook, and she often told me that if she hadn't been forced to take over her father's business, she would probably have become a chef. So cooking was the only thing that brought me comfort, especially since my father and brother did nothing to help me cope with my emotions. They suppressed any reaction to my mother's death, and, if anything, they grew even more distant from me. While in normal families, such tragedies usually bring people closer, my passion for cooking greatly angered my father, and he constantly pressured me to get out of the kitchen and do something more masculine. One day, when his patience ran out, he said that if he saw me in the kitchen again, he would make me do all the household chores. He told me to be more like my brother and a man, which ended in a huge argument where I said he never loved me, and he agreed. Everything finally came out into the open, and essentially, that was the last time we had such an open conversation because after that, I completely stopped trying to win his favor, and he showed no interest in it either. Over the next few years, I spent all my time in my room, listening to music and studying new recipes. I was determined to make a career as a chef, not just for myself, but also for my mother. Meanwhile, my father and I only communicated when necessary. My brother also paid little attention to me and ignored me, just like my father. After my mother's death, I essentially had no one to rely on. Finally, when it was time to apply to college, I decided to apply to several top culinary schools and regular colleges. I didn't know if my father would agree, but I had to try. That summer, I secretly interned at a restaurant for experience and managed to get a letter of recommendation, which helped me a lot. As a result, I was accepted into several schools, including one of the best in France. I was thrilled that this finally happened, but I was also nervous because I had to ask my father for permission to go. I was ready to beg him if he hesitated because I couldn't afford to give up my dream under any circumstances. And so, I told my father everything. Although I was prepared for him to refuse me, considering it not a man's profession, I was not prepared for him to refuse to pay for my education at all. I was still shocked. Education, after all, since my father was far from poor. In fact, he had enough money to send me to France, but it wasn't about the money. The reason was that if I went to France and got into such a prestigious school, it would make my younger brother feel insecure. He was already struggling with his studies and couldn't pull himself together, so my father wanted me to go to a local college or find a way to pay for my education myself. I was shocked that my father could be so cruel to his own son, and I didn't know what to say to him. I tried to explain that this was very important to me, but he was adamant and categorically refused to pay for the education. He even said that my brother's well-being was his top priority and that he didn't want me to compete with him. I couldn't believe this was happening because I couldn't imagine any other father in the world ruining their child's dreams for the sake of their favorite. After much persuasion and tears, when he still refused to give in, I had a huge argument, said many harsh words, and left his house forever. I started living with my aunt on my mother's side, my mother's older sister. The only reason I didn't move earlier was that I found solace in the house where I grew up with my mom, and I didn't want to change schools, which I would have had to do if I moved to my aunt's, as she lived far from the middle school I attended. I told her everything, how my father categorically refused to pay for my education and that I needed her help. It was awful to ask her for such a large sum of money, as she was not as wealthy as my father, but she assured me that she would take on all my expenses. Somehow, she managed to arrange with friends, and together they helped send me to the culinary school of my dreams, for which I will always be grateful. When I got there, I worked part-time and tried to make the most of my time to justify the money spent on me. I worked very hard and gradually advanced. When I graduated, I was one of the most talented chefs in the school and found a job just a few months after graduation. I got a job in a very prestigious French restaurant and sent half of my salary to my aunt to gradually repay the debt. I was lucky that I didn't take out a student loan, otherwise, I might never have been able to pay it off. I worked in France for several years and then, having saved enough money to open my own restaurant, I returned home to the USA. For several years, I worked as a chef in another restaurant, while striving for my goal of one day opening my own restaurant. Everything was finally settled a few weeks ago, and I was finally able to open the restaurant I had been working towards for so long. Two of my friends whom I met in France also joined my business and became co-owners, so I was very happy when they let me choose the name for the restaurant. Since we were all from the same state, we all agreed to open our establishment in the city I chose. I decided to name the restaurant after my mother, which turned out to be a fortunate coincidence because she had a very beautiful and rare name for our city. Everything finally fell into place. A few days ago, we held a small party for selected guests before the official opening. Of course, I invited my aunt and some of her friends who also helped pay for my education, as well as a couple of school friends. But that was it. I did not invite my father and brother for obvious reasons. Even if I wanted to, I couldn't do it, as I hadn't spoken to them since I left home, and they never tried to contact me. I think it was for the best, but it was to be expected that they would still show up to claim part of my success, and that's exactly what happened at the party. They arrived an hour before the start, but security didn't stop them because we had the same last name, and they said they came to surprise me. At least that was true. I was genuinely surprised when I saw them. My father and brother greeted me as if nothing bad had ever happened between us and were incredibly friendly to me, probably for the first time in my life. I froze when they entered the restaurant. My friends noticed that something was wrong and politely greeted my relatives, leaving us alone. I am grateful to them for sensing my discomfort. I still hadn't recovered from the shock when they suddenly presented me with a gift, a portrait of my mother. My father even said he had it specially commissioned for me to hang in my restaurant. As soon as he heard that a new trendy restaurant with such a name had opened in our city, he immediately knew it was me. He even added that he always knew I had talent. My brother also joined the chorus of praise, saying he was incredibly proud of me. I couldn't believe my ears and immediately realized that something was wrong. I was silent, waiting for them to get to the point, because I knew they had a reason for this visit. Eventually, they revealed their purpose. It turned out that my brother was now working as a bartender, and only because my father persuaded his friend to hire him at his club. My brother's grades constantly dropped throughout school and college, so he never managed to get a high-paying job that my father always hoped for. Moreover, he also started slacking off during school football games, which is why he didn't get an athletic scholarship. Ironically, he ended up going to a community college, which few aspire to, because no one else would take him. They wanted me to make my brother a partner in the business so he would have a more respected position, even though he did absolutely nothing to deserve it. I barely managed to keep from laughing, but somehow I held back and told them I would think about it. Of course, I had no intention of thinking about it. I just didn't want to refuse them right away. I wanted them to stay at the party because I had a better plan: to humiliate my family, who crawled out of the woodwork as soon as they heard about my success. They seemed satisfied, but boy, they had no idea what was coming. After a while, the guests started arriving, and an hour later, all the invited guests were in the restaurant. I spent the evening talking to the guests. My father and brother also mingled, chatting with everyone. I even heard them boasting about me to some of the guests, and I was amazed at their audacity. Towards the end of the evening, it was time for a toast from the hosts, that is, me and my partners. My friends spoke first because I wanted to save the best for last. And finally, it was my turn. That day, I decided to say everything that had been on my mind. I started by thanking all my guests and raising a glass to my mother. After all, it was thanks to her that I was able to achieve so much. I always believed that it was her faith in me from childhood that gave me the confidence in my abilities, and this feeling stayed with me even after she was gone. Having given her due, I moved on to the part where I had to address my father and brother. I mentioned that I had to take out a loan from my aunt and her friends to get into culinary school, and I thanked them for their help. Finally, I got to the point. Why did I even need to take out a loan for my education? It was because of my family. I told everyone how I grew up with a father who never loved me, never believed in me, and constantly scolded me for being interested in feminine things like cooking, and about my younger brother, who was a copy of my father. I told everyone how my father refused to pay for my education out of fear that I would become more successful than his favorite, my younger brother, which is why I left home. But despite all the difficulties, I was able to rise and become who I am today. So, in a way, they deserve some gratitude for the obstacles I had to overcome. Otherwise, I would never have known how strong I was. As I told all this, many guests gave my father and brother such angry looks, the best they could, and they even had the sense to at least pretend to be ashamed. Although I knew it wasn't true. Nevertheless, I approached my father and brother and hugged them, playing out the same scene they did when they arrived. Why not? Two can play this game. I announced that since they came to celebrate my success, I forgave them for everything that happened in the past and even offered my brother a position as a bartender in my restaurant. To everyone, it looked like a touching reconciliation, and at the end of my speech, people even started applauding, and someone whistled. Only my family and I knew that it was nothing more than an attempt to humiliate them, and I succeeded. But they had to smile and pretend to be immensely grateful for my offer. After all, they couldn't just walk away in anger, even though that's exactly what they wanted to do. After a while, when the guests had left and it was time to go home, my father and brother approached me right outside the restaurant. They were furious, and I swear, there were angry tears in my brother's eyes. They demanded an explanation for what I had done and said that if I wasn't going to make my brother a partner, I should have just kicked them out from the start. I laughed and said that this was my way of paying them back for everything they had done to me over the years and that this was exactly what they deserved. Then I turned around and walked away without looking back, even when I heard my brother shouting that this was the cruelest thing anyone had ever done to him. He even shouted after me that I would regret it, but I didn't care because I was already getting into my car and driving away. This happened a couple of days ago, and I haven't heard from them since. My aunt thinks I may have gone too far and should have just kicked them out from the start. But I disagree. They deserved it, and I don't feel an ounce of guilt for humiliating my father and brother. I decided not to get in touch with my family to apologize. Despite my aunt thinking I was too harsh, I don't feel any guilt for what I did, and I don't intend to pretend to be sorry. And I certainly don't owe them an explanation. They had the opportunity to apologize to me when they came, but they didn't. I explained this to my aunt, and although she still thinks I shouldn't have done it, she doesn't bring it up anymore. I guess this is one of those cases where we just agreed to disagree, and I'm okay with that. As for other news, of course, my brother has been talking behind my back with our school friends, spreading lies. Unfortunately, we went to the same school, so now different people are writing to me to confirm the rumors that I allegedly humiliated and kicked out my father and brother from the restaurant, supposedly feeding them 3-day-old food. Yes, he exaggerated the story to make himself look like the victim, which is not surprising. Usually, I don't care about such petty rumors, but I don't want potential clients to take them seriously, so I wrote to my brother that if he doesn't stop spreading lies about me in my restaurant, I will make sure he loses the job he currently has. I hope this works because I have no desire to deal with this nonsense right now. I have too much work to do, and this is definitely not the time for such problems. My brother wrote back that he would only stop if I made him a partner. I don't even understand what level of idiocy and delusion he is living in. Moreover, if he wants to become a partner, doesn't it seem a bit stupid to badmouth the very restaurant he aspires to? I am absolutely sure that this is my father's tactic to get his favorite son a prestigious job without doing anything useful. But unfortunately for them, it won't work with me. I told my brother that if he doesn't stop, he will be dealing with my lawyers. And that he is not in a position to dictate terms to me. The only reason I haven't done anything yet is that I don't want to get involved in unnecessary drama. But if he tries to pull anything else, I will definitely take him down, and let him take this as the final warning. I really hope he listens for his own good. So, guys, it's been about a month since the last update. I was very busy and couldn't tell you what happened next right away. My brother did stop spreading lies behind my back, but they were still desperately trying to be part of my success. A few weeks ago, my father decided to visit me with my brother to intimidate me. They showed up at my house and threatened to sue me for using my mother's name for my restaurant. They even claimed they had already talked to a lawyer. If I didn't want trouble, I had to make my brother a partner as soon as possible. Of course, I immediately knew they were bluffing because no reasonable lawyer would take on such a ridiculous case. It seems they forgot one important fact: she was my mother too, and as far as I know, there is no law that can prevent me from using her name. By that point, I was already fed up with them, and I told them that if they didn't leave me alone, I would have to call the police. My brother lost it at that moment and tried to grab me by the collar, but fortunately, my father held him back. I think the constant humiliation finally got to him, and he snapped, but it wasn't my fault, and they were lucky I didn't call the police right then. I told my father he needed to get the hell out of here, but he just sent my brother to cool off in the car. And he wanted to talk to me alone. After my brother left, my father tried to manipulate me, saying that if my mother knew what I was doing to them, she would be very disappointed. So I should bury the hatchet. At that moment, I told him to leave me alone because even I have my limits. He can't use my mother to get his way. It's just low, and honestly, we've gone too far to talk about reconciliation. Not once during all this time did any of them even try to apologize to me, so I really don't understand why they expected me to forgive them without even asking for forgiveness. As for what my mother would think, I am sure she would be just as disappointed when my father refused to pay for my education and every damn time he made me feel worthless. So he is the last person who should be lecturing me about what my mother would approve of or not. I know she is proud of me, wherever she is, and no words from my father can change that. At least my restaurant is thriving, and I hope we can expand soon.